What if I told you the pillars of the United States, its most powerful states, are collapsing right now from the inside out? Lightning-triggered infernos are scorching forests, oceans are swallowing coastlines, industries are bleeding jobs, and sweeping deportations are ripping away the backbone of labor. This isn't a prediction, it isn't science fiction, it is the terrifying truth unfolding beneath your feet. Warning, if the strongest states can fall, no part of America is safe. California, the Golden State, is standing at the edge of catastrophe. In late summer 2025, a relentless lightning storm unleashed more than 10,000 dry strikes across the Sierra Nevada, igniting what became known as the September Lightning Complex. Nearly 14,000 acres burned. More than 90 structures, including historic buildings from the gold rush town of Chinese Camp, were reduced to rubble, and hundreds of families were forced to flee under choking skies. Firefighters battled day and night, but even with two-thirds of the blaze contained, new strikes erupted, turning every victory into another setback. For California, wildfire season has become a permanent reality. Picture this. Entire landscapes consumed in slow motion. Majestic groves of 3,000-year-old sequoias are transformed into blackened silhouettes. Gold Rush relics crumble into ash, their stories erased in minutes. Malibu's iconic beaches, once playgrounds of the wealthy, are cloaked in smoke that spreads across Los Angeles and San Diego. The skies glow red, the air turns poisonous, and what was once paradise becomes an inferno without end. California is not merely burning, it is dissolving into a vision of apocalypse. And as the earth burns, the economy bleeds. In mid-2025, sweeping federal raids struck California's farms and food plants. 20 to 40% of the agricultural workforce vanished almost overnight. Crops rotted in the fields, billions of dollars in produce were lost, and food prices surged by up to 12%. Families faced empty shelves while farmers stood powerless, their livelihoods gone. California, which provides nearly 1/8 of America's food supply, was crippled not just by fire, but by the sudden removal of its workforce. This is not a state in crisis, it is a state unraveling. If the mighty California can fall this far, what chance do the others have? The next state on this list faces an even darker fate. Louisiana, the state built on water, is now being swallowed by it. Every year, the Gulf of Mexico creeps further inland, erasing coastlines that once sheltered fishing towns and oil rigs. By 2025, the state has already lost more than 2,000 square miles of coastal land in just a few decades, a rate so fast it is described by scientists as the equivalent of a football field disappearing every 90 minutes. Hurricane Ida, just a few years earlier, caused more than $75 billion in damages, and the storms that followed have only made the wounds deeper. Now, projections warn that by 2050, Louisiana could lose another 2 million acres, pushing entire communities into extinction. But the crisis is not limited to nature. As the levees weaken and wetlands vanish, the state's economy has been dragged into a spiral. Oil and gas, once the backbone of Louisiana, are faltering, while agriculture faces devastating losses. Sugarcane and rice fields are drowning in saltwater intrusion, wiping out billions in revenue. Insurance companies are abandoning the region, labeling entire parishes as uninsurable. Families face premiums higher than their mortgages, and thousands of families have already fled north, leaving ghost towns in their wake. And then comes the human cost. Louisiana's poverty rate, already among the highest in the nation, has surged past 20%, while violent crime in New Orleans climbs with every displaced household. The state is bleeding both people and resources. Add to this the mounting strain from undocumented labor crackdowns, shrinking the workforce in construction and seafood processing, and the foundation begins to crack. Without workers, rebuilding after disasters is nearly impossible, and the cycle of collapse accelerates. Louisiana is not simply at risk, it is being erased. If this fragile state can vanish before our eyes, the next one could shatter even faster. New York, the Empire State, once symbolized wealth, ambition, and endless opportunity. But today, it is unraveling from the inside out. Behind the shimmering skyline of Manhattan lies a crisis so severe, it threatens to hollow out the very soul of the city. The rent has exploded to levels beyond imagination. The median apartment in Manhattan now exceeds $5,000 a month, while minimum wage workers would need 4 full-time jobs just to afford a one-bedroom. Entire families are being pushed into the streets, swelling a homeless population that has already climbed above 120,000 people statewide, the highest in recorded history. Tents sprawl under bridges, in subway stations, and across once proud avenues. New York City shelters are overflowing, forcing thousands to sleep in temporary encampments that resemble war zones more than safe havens. The crisis is compounded by a wave of asylum seekers and undocumented immigrants who, while desperate to work, are being caught in sweeping federal crackdowns. Restaurants, construction sites, and delivery services lose workers overnight, deepening shortages, while those who remain are often left to sleep on sidewalks with no support. The so-called city that never sleeps now trembles under the weight of a humanitarian disaster. Crime, too, is spiraling. Subway assaults have risen by 30%, and petty theft is rampant in neighborhoods once considered safe. Middle-class families are fleeing in record numbers, leaving behind a shrinking tax base and a growing divide between the ultra-rich and the destitute. Billion-dollar penthouses sit half-empty, while just blocks away, children line up at soup kitchens. New York has become the perfect portrait of inequality, a glittering facade with decay at its core. This isn't the Empire State anymore. It's an empire of despair. And if New York can collapse like this, imagine what's about to happen to the next state on this list. Florida, the Sunshine State, has become ground zero for catastrophe. Every hurricane season grows deadlier, and in 2025, the warnings have turned into a nightmare. A single superstorm barreling through the Gulf unleashed winds over 160 miles per hour, wiping entire neighborhoods off the map. More than 2.5 million residents were forced to evacuate, one of the largest mass displacements in U.S. history. Highways turned into rivers of abandoned cars, shelters overflowed, and families fled with nothing but the clothes on their backs. By the time the storm subsided, the cost of destruction exceeded $120 billion, leaving tens of thousands permanently homeless. But the storm itself is only half the story. Florida's housing market, already fragile, collapsed under the weight of the disaster. Insurance companies, overwhelmed by claims, declared entire coastal counties uninsurable. Homeowners saw premiums climb by 200%, some higher than their annual salaries. Thousands walked away from homes they could no longer protect, fueling a wave of foreclosures and ghost subdivisions stretching across Miami, Tampa, and Fort Myers. For middle-class families, the so-called paradise turned into a financial graveyard overnight. And then there is the lifeblood of Florida's economy: tourism. Beaches once crowded with sunbathers now lie scarred by erosion, littered with debris, and lined with shuttered hotels. The state that once welcomed over 130 million visitors annually now faces empty airports and deserted resorts. Jobs in hospitality vanished, driving unemployment past 15% in some regions. Combined with immigration crackdowns that drained construction and service labor, Florida's workforce is fractured beyond repair. The Sunshine State has turned into a land of storms, a place where homes crumble, businesses collapse, and entire communities scatter. If paradise can fall this hard, the devastation awaiting the next state will be even more horrifying. Texas, the Lone Star State, once prided itself on independence and strength, but today, that very independence threatens to rip the state apart. Political polarization has reached a boiling point. Activists in Austin call for secession, while leaders in Dallas and Houston warn that breaking from the Union would trigger economic chaos. The state legislature is paralyzed by infighting, and violent protests erupt on the steps of the Capitol. In 2025 alone, more than 500,000 residents fled the state, citing political instability, soaring crime, and crumbling infrastructure. Texas, the second most populous state in America, is bleeding its people faster than it can count. The cracks go deeper. The once booming oil and tech industries are slowing, not from lack of demand, but from lack of labor. Sweeping immigration crackdowns have gutted the very workforce that kept Texas growing. An estimated 30% of construction and agricultural jobs have vanished, leaving highways unfinished, crops unharvested, and entire industries on pause. Economists warn that if this continues, Texas's GDP, currently over $2.5 trillion, could contract by 10% within a decade, erasing decades of progress. For families, this collapse is visible in everyday life. Grocery prices skyrocketing, housing projects abandoned, and wages stagnating. And then comes the human toll. Homeless encampments stretch along highways outside Houston and San Antonio, while schools in rural towns shut down due to declining enrollment. Gun violence spikes as frustration boils over, with homicide rates in some urban areas rising 25% in just 1 year. The Lone Star is flickering, dimming under the weight of chaos it cannot contain. If a state as vast, wealthy, and powerful as Texas can fracture under its own contradictions, what chance does the rest of the Union have? The next state on our list reveals an even more terrifying picture of collapse. Illinois, the state once anchored by Chicago's towering skyline, is collapsing under the weight of its own decline. Chicago, once celebrated as the nation's industrial heart and financial hub, has transformed into a warning sign for the entire Midwest. Population flight has accelerated. More than 250,000 residents have left Illinois in the past 5 years, seeking safer streets and lower costs elsewhere. Entire neighborhoods on the south and west sides are dotted with boarded-up homes, their windows shattered, streets eerily silent. What was once a vibrant metropolis now feels like a shell of itself, a city with skyscrapers above and emptiness below. The numbers are terrifying. Illinois carries a public pension debt exceeding $140 billion, draining resources from schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. Chicago's crime rate has surged. Carjackings are up 30%, while murders remain among the highest of any major American city. Families who remain lock their doors at sundown, while businesses shutter earlier than ever, afraid of what lurks after dark. Tourism, once a lifeline, is faltering. Hotel occupancy in downtown districts has fallen by double digits, leaving empty lobbies and deserted streets where millions once gathered. Meanwhile, the state's tax burden continues to rise in a desperate attempt to cover ballooning deficits. Middle-class families, already squeezed by inflation, are leaving en masse, hollowing out the very tax base Illinois depends on. Employers hesitate to invest, while major corporations quietly relocate headquarters to Texas, Florida, and beyond. The cycle is vicious. Fewer people, less money, more crime, deeper decline. Illinois is not just faltering, it is decaying in plain sight. Chicago, the city that once symbolized resilience, is becoming a ghost metropolis. And if America's third largest city can crumble this quickly, the next state's collapse will be even more catastrophic. Arizona, the desert jewel of the American Southwest, is running out of its most basic resource, water. For decades, the Colorado River has sustained life across the state, feeding Phoenix, Tucson, and countless farming towns. But by 2025, water levels in Lake Mead and Lake Powell have plummeted to historic lows, forcing unprecedented rationing. Entire farming regions in Pinal County have already seen water deliveries cut by 80%, leaving thousands of acres of cropland barren. Farmers are abandoning fields of cotton and alfalfa, watching billions of dollars in agricultural revenue vanish into dust. The crisis is spreading into the cities. Phoenix, a sprawling metropolis of nearly 5 million people, now faces mandatory restrictions on household water use. Lawns are dead, swimming pools sit empty, and residents are warned to cut showers to just a few minutes. As groundwater aquifers collapse, sinkholes appear across suburban neighborhoods, swallowing roads and threatening homes. Tucson, once a thriving cultural center, is rationing water by neighborhood, leaving entire districts dry for days. Hospitals and schools struggle to operate under these conditions, forcing closures and mass relocations. The economic consequences are devastating. Construction projects, the backbone of Arizona's rapid growth, have stalled due to lack of water access, pushing unemployment up by 12% in some sectors. Real estate prices, once soaring, are crashing as buyers flee a city that cannot promise the most basic of human needs. Homeless encampments grow as families leave foreclosed homes behind, their savings drained by skyrocketing utility costs. Immigration crackdowns have only made recovery harder, stripping away much of the labor force that once sustained agriculture and construction, leaving skeleton crews to face impossible workloads. Arizona is not just drying, it is dying. And as its reservoirs turn to sand, the next state on this list faces a collapse even more terrifying. Michigan, once the proud engine of America, is grinding to a halt. The state that gave the world the automobile is now a cautionary tale of collapse. Detroit, once called the Motor City, has lost more than 60% of its population since its peak in the 1950s. Streets that once roared with the sound of assembly lines now echo with silence. Empty factories stretch for miles, their windows shattered, their walls covered in graffiti, silent monuments to a bygone era. In 2025, auto industry layoffs surged again as electric vehicle plants downsized, eliminating tens of thousands of jobs in a single year. The human cost is staggering. Michigan's poverty rate now hovers near 18%, with some districts of Detroit facing child poverty rates above 40%. Entire neighborhoods are abandoned, leaving behind ghost blocks where weeds grow taller than the houses. More than 30,000 vacant buildings dot Detroit alone, attracting crime, fires, and despair. Homicides have climbed by double digits, and emergency services are stretched so thin that response times in some areas exceed an hour. For residents, safety is no longer guaranteed. Survival depends on luck. The state's infrastructure mirrors the decay. Michigan's roads, already ranked among the worst in the nation, crumble further each year, costing drivers billions in damages. Schools are closing, forcing children into overcrowded classrooms miles from home. Meanwhile, those who can leave are leaving, an exodus that drains tax revenues and deepens the spiral. The once mighty arsenal of democracy has become a battlefield of poverty and neglect. Michigan is not just in decline, it is collapsing before our eyes. If the industrial heart of America can be hollowed out this completely, the next state's downfall will be even chilling, pushing the nation closer to a breaking point. West Virginia, once the proud backbone of America's coal industry, is collapsing into silence. For over a century, coal powered the nation and put food on the tables of Appalachian families. But by 2025, the mines have become graveyards. More than 80% of coal jobs that existed in the 1950s are gone, leaving entire towns deserted. Rusting tipples, abandoned rail yards, and hollowed-out main streets testify to a state left behind by progress. In the last decade alone, West Virginia has lost nearly 100,000 residents, fleeing poverty, joblessness, and despair. The fallout is devastating. Poverty has swallowed vast regions. More than 17% of the population lives below the poverty line, and in some rural counties, that number exceeds 25%. With jobs gone, addiction has surged. The opioid crisis ravages Appalachia. West Virginia now suffers the highest overdose death rate in the nation, a grim title that shows no sign of loosening its grip. Families bury their loved ones while hospitals close at alarming rates, leaving residents to drive hours for even basic care. Infant mortality remains among the highest in the country, a tragic indicator of a health system in ruins. The human face of collapse is impossible to ignore. Schools in coal towns shut down due to lack of students, leaving playgrounds to rust. Homeless encampments grow beneath interstate bridges as veterans and former miners struggle to survive on meager benefits. Shops that once thrived on miner wages are shuttered, replaced by pawn shops and payday lenders. Hope itself is vanishing. West Virginia is not just declining, it is disintegrating. When the mountains that fueled America's growth can no longer sustain their own people, the warning is clear. The next state's collapse will push the nation even closer to the abyss. Puerto Rico, the Caribbean territory of the United States, is on the brink of vanishing. Once called the Island of Enchantment, it is now the Island of Exodus. For decades, Puerto Rico has been drowning in debt, over $70 billion, and by 2025, the crisis has only deepened. Entire government services teeter on collapse as hospitals shutter, power outages last for weeks, and public workers go unpaid. What remains is a society hanging by a thread, unable to rebuild before the next disaster strikes. And the disasters come relentlessly. Hurricanes slam the island with terrifying regularity, each one more destructive than the last. In just 5 years, storms have caused more than $100 billion in damages, flattening homes, destroying power grids, and leaving millions without clean water. Floods sweep away entire neighborhoods, while landslides bury mountain towns. For families who have lost everything more than once, there is no safety net, only despair and displacement. Tens of thousands now live in temporary shelters, while others crowd onto ferries and flights bound for the mainland. The human toll is staggering. Puerto Rico's population has shrunk by nearly 500,000 people in the past decade, a mass exodus that drains the island of its workforce and future. Those who stay behind face crumbling infrastructure, unemployment rates double the national average, and poverty levels approaching 45%. The once vibrant culture of San Juan streets is now overshadowed by boarded-up businesses and silent plazas. Ghost towns stretch across the countryside, reminders of lives abandoned. Puerto Rico is not merely struggling, it is nearly erased. An American territory where survival feels impossible, where every storm writes another chapter of destruction. If an entire island can be pushed to the edge of extinction, What does that say about the fate of the United States itself? The evidence is overwhelming. From California's infernos to Florida's drowning coastlines, from New York's spiraling homelessness to Puerto Rico's mass exodus, the map of America is unraveling in front of us. 10 states and territories, each once a pillar of strength, now stand as monuments of fragility. Wildfires, hurricanes, bankrupt cities, collapsing industries, and brutal crackdowns have all converged into one terrifying reality. If these states can fall, none are safe. This is not a distant prophecy. It is a ticking bomb. Every number tells the same story. Billions lost, millions displaced, families shattered. The United States, once untouchable, is bleeding from within. The cracks are no longer hidden. They are wide open for anyone willing to look. And yet, the question remains, what else are we not being told? What truths are buried beneath official statements, hidden away while entire communities vanish? If all of these warnings are true, then we are living on borrowed time. The empire is shaking, and the collapse may already be unstoppable. But you must decide what to believe. Do you trust the headlines or the evidence carved into the ruins of our own cities? Tell us what you think. Comment below with your thoughts. Share this video with everyone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more investigations into the terrifying realities they don't want you to know. Because the story doesn't end here. This is only the beginning.